Sheryl went to Google, and the rest is history. Sheryl Sandberg.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. It is so great to be here in Chicago at this amazing event. Thank you to John and Kevin and Donna for organizing this. Thank you to your mayor, Ram. I know you guys know this, but I got to spend the morning with him in action with your children, getting a great experience during their spring break, kids who would not otherwise have access to science and math education getting it. So I've decided I want him to be my mayor, and I can get more cheesecake if I moved here, so I'm moving to Chicago. But I am really excited to be here to talk about my book and what I think is going on with women. So I wrote Lean In because despite all the progress women have made, we are nowhere close to having our share of the leadership roles anywhere in the world. The blunt truth is that men run the world. There are 17 countries in this world that are run by women. Women hold 1/5 of the seats in parliament globally, and there is not a single country in the world, including ours, that has 5% of its top companies run by women. Not 5%. And what this means is that when the decisions are made that impact all of us, from the PTA meeting to the town hall to the national legislature, our voices are not equally heard. And what's worse than this is that women are no longer making progress at the same rate. In corporate America, women have held 14% of the top jobs for 10 years. 10 years of absolutely no progress for women in this country. And the reason I wrote Lean In is I think there's surprisingly little focus on this. Now, I think part of that is because there is legitimate concern about how significantly women are outpacing men in educational attainment. And it's leading us to this narrative worrying about the end of men. And that is a real worry in educational attainment. But people can take it a bit too far. There's a conference that John and I attend every summer. It's a very exclusive conference, probably the most exclusive of the year. And I sat down at lunch next to a man, a white man, and he sat down next to me and he said, "Remember us." And I literally didn't know what he was talking about. I said, "Remember you?" And he said, "There's a place for white men." And I said, "There sure is. Look at this conference." And he said, "Oh no, when women are running the world, remember us." And I looked at him and I said, "Do you know that not only has there never been anyone other than a white man running a company in your industry now, there has never been anything other than a white man running any company in your industry?" And he said, "Oh yes, but the end is coming." So this room is filled with incredibly accomplished business people. And as business people, we follow trends. Progress for women in gaining leadership roles in our companies went up from the 1970s till about 10 years ago. And for 10 years, it's been totally flat. What happens to trends that go up and then are flat for 10 years? They go down, or they stay. It takes something really extraordinary to lift those up again. And the problem with this persistent inequality is that it's a missed opportunity for all of us. Our companies would be much more productive if they used the full talents of the population. Warren Buffett has famously and graciously said that one of the reasons he's so successful is that he was only competing with half the population. But when it comes to filling the leadership roles of any industry, and I want to be clear, any industry in this country, we are still sourcing from half the population. Now, Gloria Steinem always says that men who come to events like this, when the inevitable feminist revolution happens, you get a pass. And so, it is a good use of your time. Congratulate yourselves. But I don't believe you're here for that pass in the inevitable feminist revolution. I think you're here because you know as managers what we all know, which is that if you can hire, retain, and attract talent from the entire population rather than half, you're going to be more productive. Your company is going to be stronger. You're going to be the manager that more people want to work with, and that's a competitive advantage. Our families are also better off. We know that at any income level, no matter what maternal involvement, a mother's involvement is with her children, children have better outcomes from happiness to educational attainment to career satisfaction when they have active and engaged fathers. We know that marriages are better off. Couples that split things more evenly, where the woman participates in breadwinning and the man participates in childrearing and housework on a more even scale, those marriages are happier. And if that wasn't enough incentive, what I've said publicly and is very true is that the best way to have more sex with your wife is do the laundry. This is scientific stuff. And ever since I've been saying this on my book tour, I keep getting these messages, Facebook messages from male friends of mine. I'd love to read your book, but I'm busy doing the laundry. More importantly, I think we all want a world of equal opportunity. One of the reasons I wrote Lean In is because a year and a half ago for President's Day, my husband and I got a tape, the song, kid song of all the presidents, and we played it for our then 4-year-old daughter, and she looked up and she said, "Mommy, why are they all boys?" She learned that at 4, and that is not a world of equal opportunity. So how are we going to get there, right? How are we actually going to get to equal opportunity? Isn't even possible. Women are held back by a lot of things. Women are held back by sexism, overt and quieter sexism, discrimination, terrible public policy. Our country lags most other developed nations. Childcare that's not affordable. But we're also held back by things within ourselves. I want to be clear, and my book says this clearly, we need to address all of these public policies and all of the institutional reform we need. I'm for it. There are so many people here working on this. But even if we did all of that, it's not enough. And the reason we know it's not enough is that there are many countries in Europe and Scandinavia and other places that have every correct public policy and institutional reform we could ever want. Do you know how many women run their big companies? Less than 3%. And so all of that institutional reform is important, and we should be for it, and we should all work for it, as I am. But it's not enough. In order to get to real equality, we're going to have a real commitment to it. We're going to have to want it, and we're going to have to want it badly. And we're going to have an honest and open dialogue. So what I want to do with this extraordinary audience that I'm grateful to have an opportunity to speak to is I want to use my time with you today to talk about 4 things. 4 things I think every single one of us in this audience can do when we leave today and go run our companies, run our institutions, contribute. 4 things we can do right now to change the dynamics around gender and get more women into leadership roles. The first is to push back on stereotypes. The second is help women reach for more opportunities. The third is mentor and sponsor women. And the fourth is to help women navigate through the child-rearing years. Let's start with stereotypes. At my wedding, my brother and sister came up to give a toast, and it was a lovely toast. They started off by saying, "Hi, we're Sheryl's younger brother and sister, David and Michelle, but we're not really her younger brother and sister. We're really her first employees. Employee 1 and employee 2. Because Sheryl never really played as a child. She more like organized other children's play." And everyone laughed. And they should laugh because it is funny. But there's something that's not funny about that joke. There is a tinge in that joke which is saying little girls aren't supposed to be that assertive. And if you don't believe me, go to the playground this weekend and watch parents talk about children. They will call their little girls bossy. You almost never hear a little boy called bossy. Because when a boy leads, that's expected. It doesn't offend or surprise. But when a girl does, it's bossy. A national retailer printed up t-shirts, onesies for babies. On the boys, smart like daddy. On the girls, pretty like mommy. Those stereotypes start in childhood, and decades of social science research in every country in the world tells us one thing, which is that stereotypes are enormously self-reinforcing. And it is those t-shirts and that language on the playground that leads directly to what I think one of the biggest challenges women face in the workforce, which is the success and likability penalty women face. As men get more successful, they are better liked by men and women. And as women get more successful, they are less liked by women and men. And this holds us back. Rachel Thomas is the new president of leanin.org, the foundation I'm starting along with the book. And she was talking to her 5-year-old daughter, Haley, about why she took the job. And she said, Haley, what if I told you that as mommy does better at work, fewer people like me? But as daddy does better at work, more people like him. What would you say? And she expected her daughter to say, oh, that's so unfair. But you know what her daughter said? She said, well then, mommy, I would be less successful, so more people will like me. Walk into any company in this country, and I promise you'll hear the following. You'll hear reviews of women, and they'll say things like, she's really good at her job, she's just not as well liked as her peers. Or, she's a little too aggressive. How many women in this audience, I'll raise my hand, have been told you are too aggressive at work? How many men in this audience have been told you are too aggressive at work? Raise your hands. Hi. If we understand this problem, if we understand it and acknowledge it, we can change it today, right now, right here. I'm watching this happen at Facebook. There's a man who works for me. We just did our 360 performance review cycle at the beginning of the year. And he came to me and he said, well, I got feedback on a woman who works for me that she was too aggressive. And then he said, I haven't read your book. Career limiting for him. Like, I mean, if you worked for me, would you read my book or at least pretend? Setting that aside, he said, but I have been listening to all the things you've said all these years, and rather than write down too aggressive in her review, I went back and I sat down with the people, men and women, that gave that feedback, and I said, can you tell me, what'd she do that was too aggressive, specifically? And they answered. And then he said to each of them, if a man had done exactly that same thing, would you have thought it was too aggressive? And to a person, they said no. Second thing we can do, we can help women reach for opportunities, and we can understand the dynamics that are holding us back. In college, I took a class, European Intellectual History. You have to love that, right? Don't you kind of long for those days? And I took it with my roommate, Carrie, who was a brilliant literature student. We were seniors. And my brother, David, who was a water polo playing pre-med and did not care as much as we did. Carrie and I went to all the lectures. She read all the books in the original languages. I read all the books in English. My brother went to 2 lectures and read 1 book out of 10. And he marched himself up to our dorm room to get himself tutored a couple days before the exam. And we tried to help him as best we could. A couple days later, all 3 of us sit for that exam with the little blue books, like I am actually that old, right? Before computers, no laptops in those days. And we leave the exam, we all look at each other and say, how'd you do? And Carrie says, you know, I'm not sure I really explored the Hegelian dialect in its full potential. And I said, I'm really worried that I didn't connect Locke's theory of property to the philosophers who came up behind him. And my brother looked at us and said, I got the flat one. The flat one? The flat A. What this story tells us is what the data shows, which is that relative to levels of performance, men will remember their performance slightly high, and women will remember their performance slightly low. Even more importantly, when you ask a man why he was successful at something, he will attribute that success to himself, to his own skills and his own ability. And that's important because that's what makes something replicable. A woman, when you ask her why she was successful, she'll attribute that success to hard work, help from others, and getting lucky. And what that means is that relative to levels of performance, more men will reach for opportunities than women, more men will sit at tables. You can watch this play out in your offices. Go home after lunch today, go back to your office and watch where people sit in a meeting. And what I promise you is that relative to levels, more men will sit in the center and at the side and the front of the table, and more women will sit in the side and on the back every time, even people who have heard me give this speech. And we know that men apply for promotions when they meet 60% of the criteria and women when they meet 100. So the goal of Lean In, why I'm talking about this, is that if we're aware of this imbalance, as managers, we can help correct it. But I want to be really honest, and my book is super honest about how hard this is. So I just wrote an entire book on how women should have more self-confidence, right? A whole book. A couple of weeks ago, I'm at a meeting at Facebook. It's our senior management team, and we're talking about this one issue where one of our leaders, Jay Parikh, and he and I both thought for many years Facebook should do something and no one else agreed with us. And over the course of this last couple months, everyone agreed we're going to do what Jay and I are recommending. So I'm pretty open and honest. I talk in my book about bringing your whole self to work, and it's my management team. So I'm saying, like, God, I'm so grateful. I'm so glad we're doing this. All these years, I wanted to do it. You all didn't. I was worried. I was wrong. Jay looks up and he says, oh, I knew they were wrong and they'd come around eventually. Then I'm Facebook messaging with Jay. I said, Jay, can I use that story on my book tour? He's like, oh, sure. I said, Jay, can I use your name? Sure. I said, Jay, don't worry. He's the nicest guy. I'm not going to make you look arrogant. Oh, I'm not worried about that. My book is honest and clear. To this day, I have all of those challenges of sitting at the table and raising my hand. And as a manager, I don't always notice. I gave this talk at Facebook about the different levels of self-confidence for men and women. And later that day, a woman came to see me, and she said, I learned something today. So I'm feeling great. I'm like, great, she learned something. She said, I learned I need to keep my hand up. And I'm like, great, that was one of my main messages. And she's like, no. I learned I need to keep my hand up because at the end of your talk, you said you're going to take 2 more questions. And I had my hand up along with a lot of women, and after 2 questions, I put my hand down. And so did all the women. And you took more questions, only from the men. And so if it's me giving this talk, and in this talk, I can't recognize that the women have put their hands down and the men have kept their hands up, as managers, we need to internalize how hard it is for us to see these differences and work even harder to help women reach for opportunities. The good news is there's a lot of ways we can do this. Not just waving women over to the table, which we can do, but other things that will really matter. We know that women get interrupted more than men. Relative to men, both men and women will interrupt women. Ken Chenault, the CEO of American Express, when that happens in his company, he stops the meeting and he says, I'd really like to hear what she's saying. Anyone can do that, anyone at any level, even if you are more junior, if you are the person who does that, you are gaining power in that audience because you're showing your ability to stand up for someone else. We can do that. And as managers, we so often put people in jobs because they raise their hand and they're already doing them, but we can pause and we can encourage more women to believe in themselves more, raise their hands, keep their hands up, and sit at more tables. Third thing we can do. We can mentor and sponsor women. Mentorship and sponsorship is enormously important for career progression. People who have them, both men and women, do better. We also know that men get better mentors and sponsors than women, particularly on sponsorship, someone who will really advocate for you in your company. And it's harder for women to have these relationships for 2 reasons. One of them is that we all like people like us. We resonate to people like us. We feel more comfortable. But there's something else going on, and I think it's something we don't actually talk about honestly, and Lean In is trying to change that. A man and a man at a bar, what does that look like? Mentoring? What does a man and a woman at a bar look like? What does an older man and a younger woman at a bar look like? Yeah, and 86% of the senior roles in this country are held by men. And if we are going to mentor young women, we are talking about older men spending time with younger women. 64% of managers in the United States say they are nervous to be alone in a room with a woman. How are we going to mentor and sponsor if we can't be alone in a room with a woman? There's a story I share in my book that many, many people told me not to share, but it's an important story. I was working for Larry Summers, as Ram said, and we were traveling. We were on a trip to South Africa, and there was a time change, and we hadn't written his speech for the next day. And we stayed up really late in the living room part of his hotel suite working, and then we were done with the speech, and it was 3 a.m. And we looked at each other, never said a word, and was like, oh, this is not good. And I walked out of the room, and no one was there, but we both knew that it would really look bad for me to be in that hotel suite at 3 a.m. The problem is that those are the hours that get you promoted and sponsored. The hours where you are in with your boss, able to work hard, able to pull off something difficult. And if Larry and I had been more thoughtful, I never would have gotten that opportunity, but if he were traveling with a man, he would have gotten that chance. And that is what is systematically happening to women, and we need to start talking about it and addressing it. Now, there are lots of ways to address this. We just need to make access equal. There's a story in my book of a man from Goldman Sachs many years ago named Bob Steele. He recognized this, and he said, I don't feel comfortable having dinner with women. And he just announced, I will therefore only have breakfast and lunch with anyone. And he took a lot of flack for it at the time. You know, there are other people, Ken Chenault, he says, I'll have dinner with anyone. That's part of my job. I don't care how every company does it, how every person does it, but let's make access equal. Let's talk about this problem openly and honestly so we can get to policies that give equal access for men and women. Fourth thing we can do, help women navigate through the child-rearing years. My friend Peggy has a friend who has a daughter in kindergarten. And the daughter came home and said, Mommy, I have a problem. And she said, what's the problem? And she said, well, I want to be an astronaut. And the boy I like wants to be an astronaut too. She said, well, that's okay. She didn't know they were going to cancel the space program yet. That was their real problem. She said, but if we both go into space, who's going to take care of our children? I think it will have to be me. She's 5. From my mother's generation to mine, we have made much more progress in the workplace than we have at home. And the latter is holding the former back considerably. We expect women to do the majority of the housework and the childcare, and they do. And they continue to do, even though most couples in this country, both people are working full-time. Despite that, women are doing somewhere between 30 to 40% to double what their husbands are doing. This fundamentally changes how we approach careers. I can't emphasize enough how much this is affecting us. Think about a career, having a career and a family as a marathon. Long, grueling, ultimately rewarding. Men and women get to the start line equally fit and trained, right? You can imagine with the educational attainment women are even better trained, but let's say equal. The gun goes off. What are the voices? What do the men hear? They hear, keep going. Good start to the race. You've got this, right? What do the women hear? Are you sure you should be running? Does it make sense to start a race you're probably not going to finish? Don't you want kids one day? The race continues. The voices grow louder for the men. You've got this. The finish line is right there. You can do it. The voices for the women grow hostile. Why are you running when you have children at home? Men in this audience, if you work and you have children, please raise your hand if anyone has ever said to you, should you be working? Raise your hand. Held them high. Men right now, men. Has anyone ever said to you, should you be working? Women in this audience who are working full-time and have kids, has anyone ever said to you, should you be working? As employers, we want to retain the best people. And we know that we lose a lot of our high potential women either to the top jobs because they lean back even though they stay in the workforce, or to the workforce altogether. And what do we do about this? We never talk about it. Never. My book tells the story of my first pregnancy. I was at Google at the time. Google was an enormously supportive company, but still no one really talked about this. No one helped me navigate through, and I spent all that time worrying about what every friend I know worried about. I was gonna lose my job, someone else was gonna take it, someone was gonna find out I was pregnant, right? Does that feel familiar to the women here? We leave women on their own to navigate through this. And you know what? It's not working. It is not working because the funnel is narrowing through those child-rearing years. If we start talking openly about this, we can also help women not leave before they leave. There's a woman who came to see me at Facebook years ago, and she looked very young, and she started asking me all these questions. You know, how do you balance your career and your family? And the questions just kept coming furiously, and so I answered them for a while. And then I just paused and I said, because she looked so young, I said, do you mind my asking, do you have a child? And she said, oh no. And I said, well, are you thinking about having a child? She said, oh no. She started laughing. She said, I just graduated from college. I don't even have a boyfriend. I just want to be prepared. What I have seen more than anything else in my career is women leaving before they leave. Years before they have those responsibilities, women are leaning back and they're doing it quietly, making room for responsibilities they don't yet have. I want to be clear, and my book is clear about this. Once you have a child, these are hard decisions. And I am respectful and supportive of any decision women want to make, and men. Raising a parent, being a full-time parent, raising a child is the hardest job in the world and the most important. I just want to see women make that decision when they have a child. Because by making room for a child years before, what happens is inevitable. The guy they're sitting next to who's not worrying about that, he gets promoted. And then the years pass and she comes back to work and is leaving a child at home and she feels undervalued. And she's working for someone that she could have had his job, and then she leaves. And so I think we're watching a generation of women not make one decision to leave the workforce, but these small decisions that kind of paper cut us there. Again, because we don't talk about this. None of these changes are easy. As part of my book tour, I went to see some of the financial institutions in New York, and I did some private meetings. And in one of them, a very senior manager on Wall Street looked at me and said, okay, I hear you, but I want to tell you what happens when I do a review for a woman. When I do a review for a woman, I write it, HR reads it 3 times, 2 lawyers review their work, and then I stick to the script. There is not one word I say that has not been approved. And I looked at him and I said, okay, I understand, that's your company's rules, you're not doing this to yourself. What happens when you give a performance review to a man? He says, oh, we just talk. Who do you think is getting better career coaching? Can you even compare the opportunity those 2 people are getting? We have very well-intentioned and important laws. Our laws prevent discrimination. They prevent discrimination on gender, on age, on pregnancy, on all of these important characteristics. But the law is that we can't discriminate, not that we can't discuss. And it is only, and this is what Lean In is trying to do, only if we start finding legally appropriate ways to talk about all of these challenges that we will meet them. We can push back on stereotypes. I gave a talk like this in New York a couple days ago, and as I walked off the stage, a CEO grabbed my hand and he said, thank you. And I said, why? And he said, well, we have a very senior job open in my company. We have 2 candidates, a man and a woman. She has slightly better results. He is better liked. We were about to pick the man. I'm picking the woman. Thank you. Because now I understand why she's not as well liked. And I understand that if I put more women in leadership roles, I can help change that. If we change the numbers, we change the stereotypes. The reason we think women don't lead is because they don't lead. And the reason we think men don't nurture is because they don't nurture. But if we start leading as women and nurturing as men, those stereotypes change and the success and likability penalty goes away. That CEO did his part to help not just that woman lead, but all women lead. We can make it a badge of honor to mentor and sponsor young women. Rather than worrying about people seeing an older man and a younger woman in a room, we can look at that room and say, he's doing his job. We can recognize that he's going to be a better manager for the time he spends alone with her, of course, in appropriate ways. Everyone needs to behave here. But we can make it a badge of honor for him rather than something he's embarrassed about, just by saying thank you. The power of anyone in this room looking at someone in your office and saying, I saw you spending time with that woman, that young woman. Thank you on behalf of this company. You change that dynamic like this. We can help women navigate through their child-rearing years. My brother's a surgeon. He just moved to Houston. He's building a new team. Unlike the guy who works for me, he did read my book. And he did the following. There's a woman he's trying to hire. He's making her an offer. He said to her, I hope you come work here. I want you on my surgical team. And then he said, and I note, she's like in her late 20s, just got engaged, you may want to have kids one day. Right? Anyone ever say that? Okay. He said, and if you do, that's your business. You never have to talk to me about it. But I have two sisters, I'm one of them, and I have a wife, and I watched as they struggled through this. They worried anyone would find out they were pregnant. They worried anyone could tell they were pregnant. They worried they would lose their jobs through this process. And I never want that to happen to you. So if you join my team and you ever want to talk to me, my door's open. I'm here to help make this work. I'm not going to give the good surgeries to some guy because you're pregnant. I'm going to help you take a leave and help you come back. Again, you don't have to talk to me, but if you want to, my door is open. That conversation is not just legally permissible, that's management best practices. And anyone who has that is going to have better results. And every single person in this audience, we can all do this today. And more importantly, we can start understanding, and my book goes through this, that every single one of us, myself included, the gender biases we all feel run deep. None of us are gender blind. And the reactions we have when women assert, when women lead, we can change those by noticing them. A good friend of mine says that now every time she wants to call her daughter bossy, she says, my daughter has executive leadership skills. I hope my book is just the beginning. Along with the book, startedleanin.org, we're doing 3 things. We're building an online community. Come join us at leanin.org or come to our Facebook page. We're providing Lean In education, 20-minute lectures. We worked with the Clayman Institute for Gender Research at Stanford to produce things like how to negotiate for yourself, things like, how do you comport yourself, how do you think about how you present in a meeting. They're up there. How to level a playing field. We hope men as well as women will watch them. And we're working with a group of our founders, and our Lean In launch team is here together with YPO and others, joining Lean In circles, helping people, men or women, self-organize into groups of 8 to 10 that meet once a month to really help themselves pursue any ambition they have with vigor. Of all the speeches I've done for my book tour, I was most excited to do this one because this is the largest business audience I will have a chance to speak to. And I'm hoping that when you leave lunch, we won't go back to doing business our own way. For me as well, these are changes I need to make. And if you do this, you won't be alone. John Chambers is the CEO of Cisco. After the book launched, he gave the book to his top 400 people, and he asked each of them to tell him what are the 2 to 3 things they were going to do differently with women. Mohammed El Arian of PIMCO, I've never actually met him, but he's been talking broadly about the book and how PIMCO is now having internal conversations on nudge techniques and what they can do to help more women get to the top. Leanin.org has over 150 corporate partners, from local companies like Mondelez and Heidrick and Struggles to Target to Ford to GM. If you come on the site, you'll see amazing stories of people in their Lean In moments. One from your very own and my dear friend Melody Hobson, talking about the steps she took in her career to lean in. I believe that we can band together, have an honest conversation about all of these things we know are happening, we just don't know how to talk about, and we can tear down the barriers and break down the stereotypes. I also believe that now is the time for us to change this. I didn't have to crack a glass ceiling. That happened before me. The women, and there are so many of them in this audience who got there first, thank you because you made it easier for me. And it is our job, everyone in this audience, to make it easier for the next generation. I'm really grateful that the response to my book has been so loud in terms of a national conversation, because we need a national conversation, in my view. But this problem will not be solved on the front page of every paper. This problem will not be solved with a national conversation. This problem gets solved in the private conversations between every partner, every husband and wife, every employer and colleague and worker, and every parent and child. I have a 7-year-old son who lost both his front teeth last night, and a 5-year-old daughter. I want a world of real equality for them, much as I want it for all of you and all of your children. I believe now is our moment, and we can do this if we lean in together. Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your questions that you guys have submitted. I've got some of them here, and we've got a little bit less time, but that was amazing. I mean, you've given this talk obviously a few times, but just to this audience, this is the biggest business audience. Thanks, everybody, for being here, and congratulations. You know, I remember you at Google. You know, Ram, said how at Google. How are you going to Google and all this stuff? You know, you were one of the people that made Google so successful for so long, and then Facebook and everything you've done there. So I guess the first question is, how do you have it all? I mean, you do have it all. You're the chief operating officer of Facebook. You've written a book that has created an incredible dialogue over the last few weeks. You've had such an amazing career as a great mother, apparently from reading the book, and your husband and your partnership there. So how do you have it all?
No, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think one of the best things we can do is make sure that language gets banned from our vocabulary. So, no, it's a great question. Yeah. I'm glad you asked. Having it all is language that's only ever used for women. Any man ever been asked, man, raise your hand if you've ever been asked, how do you have it all? If you're a man, raise your hand. There you go. Women, raise your hand if you've ever been asked, how do you have it all? Yeah. So what that language is that language is about assuming that men can have careers and families and women can't. Right. For women, there's an implicit choice. And I think, look, I have a lot of us in this room are very, very lucky and very privileged. And we can and should be grateful for everything we have, as I am. Yeah. But none of us have it all, because we make trade-offs every single minute of every single day between working and resting, between exercise and sleep, between time for ourselves and time for our children. And I think it's recognizing the inherent trade-offs we have to make that make the difference.
Absolutely. And you found a way, yes, absolutely, makes sense. So, all right. So I read the book over the last few weeks. My wife, who's sitting here in one of the front tables, who's a successful professional and entrepreneur in her own right. We have 3 beautiful children, 2 daughters. And so as I was reading the book the last couple of weeks, I found myself doing more around the house.
That's awesome.
I was doing more.
How's that going for you?
It felt great. I feel like I've already been doing some work, but I could do more. And my wife has been so appreciative of it. And no,
You're
seriously,
welcome.
it's been very.
You're welcome.
So what has been the reaction from a lot of the men you've spoken to in audiences like this?
Yeah. So the book tries to be really clear about this. I'm not arguing that men should do more for women in the workplace and at home because it's good for women. Right. I'm arguing it's good for them. So look, the data is super clear that more equal marriages are happier. Right. The joking about laundry and sex is not really a joke. Marriages where there is more equal division of labor are happier and also do have more sex. Right. Children with more active fathers have better outcomes no matter what else is true. And so this is really important, not just for your own happiness, but for your wife's and children's. In the workplace, if you are the man, if you are the Ken Chenault who attracts the most women, can work with the most women, if you are John Rogers and you have Melody Hobson, you are communicating to the world that you're going to attract the best talent, because people want to work where they see others being treated well. And we know that more diverse teams have better performance. And so I think a lot of men that I've spoken to in the course of the book tour and the book are saying, yeah, I'm doing more at home. And you know what? It's actually pretty great. It's pretty great.
No, it is. It is pretty great from personal
And
experience.
the first time you try to talk to a woman and say, you don't have to talk to me about this, but in case you ever want to talk to this, my door is open.
Yeah.
I promise your heart will be beating, and I promise your results will get better.
Right. Well, I've learned that, and hopefully a lot of men in the audience also read the book and get some good lessons out of it. Here's a question for you. We have a lot of great CEOs in the audience. We have Mary Dillon here from US Cellular, Eileen Gordon, you mentioned Melody, a lot of great women CEOs in Chicago. What kinds of things can CEOs do in their organizations to affect and bring some of the lessons of lean in their organizations? Some things you've done at
Yes, we
Facebook.
have corporate partnerships, so any company, you can do it online, can join us as a Lean In partner. We'll give you the ability to use, we built a technology platform to bring the Lean In education to any of your employees you want, as well as an opportunity to talk publicly about what you're doing for women. Right. So we think that can be a good step in the right direction. I'm a huge fan of official mentorship and sponsorship programs because they take away that problem of why are you spending time with her? That implicit question that people basically have, if you have an official program where people are supposed to mentor someone, all of a sudden it makes perfect sense to everyone to be alone in a room. I don't think we should have to have those programs, but I think it is a good interim step to do it. I also think pushing back on that likability penalty. I promise you will hear it every day now that if you're aware of it. Every day you will hear ways in which a woman does one thing, a man does the same thing, and it's a problem for her. And so understanding, we all, men and women, even those who have done research on this, we react badly when women negotiate for themselves. And we all think it's completely fine. We react emotionally fine when men negotiate for themselves. Just knowing that and telling your organizations that means the next time a woman starts negotiating and someone starts feeling uncomfortable, they're gonna be like, wait a second, if this were a man, it would be fine. And that changes the behavior.
Absolutely. Why is it, why now? Why was it so important to share this message now? I mean, from reading the book, you've had these experiences throughout, Harvard and Treasury and Google and Facebook. Why now? Why was this the
I think because we've
moment?
had 10 years of stagnation that no one's really noticing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a pretty urgent situation. If there was a trend, any other trend that was so important to the future of our country and went flat for 10 years. I mean, often when things slow down quietly, we don't notice versus there's a big drop. This is not a big drop, but flat for 10 years is a really serious problem.
Absolutely.
And I think it's incumbent upon all of us. This is about our national competitiveness of our country, competitiveness in our companies, the health and wealth of our families.
Well, and in the tech world specifically, that we've come from, I mean, the engineering side of things, getting young girls excited about STEM education, getting them excited about computer science and that kind of thing is such a big thing. At Google, we had a lot of programs in Chicago. The mayor just announced a tech diversity council to get more folks involved in the technology world in these high growth, high paying jobs.
Yeah, and I spent the morning with the mayor and technology. So the same challenges women face in leadership are the same exact challenges women face in STEM. So the reason we don't associate women with leadership qualities is there aren't enough women leaders. The reason we don't associate women with science and math is because there aren't enough female science and math. Sociologists call this stereotype threat. What stereotype threat means is that when you are aware of a stereotype, you are more likely to act in its accordance. So this is why if you give boys and girls a math test, and right before the test you have them check off if they're a male or a female, boys do the same on that test and girls do worse. If you give that same math test and you announce to the class, girls do really well on this test, the girls do better. And so we have the same challenges in science and math. Also, a very serious competitiveness issue for the country. We have a lack of computer scientists in this country. For every computer scientist we hire more people, so it's affecting our unemployment rate. If you just got girls into computer science at the same rate we get boys, you would close 100% of the missing computer scientists in this country, right there, just by making gender equal.
Let's do that.
We're gonna have to start.
No, absolutely, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it's not happening. So I live in Silicon Valley. You would think it would happen there. I put my 7-year-old last summer in ID Tech Camp, which is like the summer computer camp for a week. And at 7, anyone who's parents, at 7 you're deciding what your kids do, not the kids, right? There were 35 kids in that class for the week, 30 boys and 5 girls. Of those 2 girls, I put 2 of them in because they were my niece and her friend. And so even for the parents of Silicon Valley, we need to wake up. Because anyone who thinks that ratios are going the wrong way just has to visit the 7-year-old ID Tech Camp to see that it's not happening.
Right, absolutely. All right, I gotta move to a topic that is gonna come up. I'm sure it's come up everywhere, but you've been on the cover of Time. You've been on 60 Minutes, and your husband. That was a great interview. You've been, in all the media. There's been some criticism, some backlash.
What criticism?
Right. Just a little. But that seems to have also increased the dialogue about it. So, how have you dealt with that?
Yeah.
And then what do you say to it?
I'm clear and honest about this in my book. This is personal. This is personal for me. I wrote this book for every young girl like me who's ever been called bossy on a playground, and who hopefully won't be called bossy on the playground tomorrow. Yeah. And these issues run deep, right? I am challenging what we think, how we feel, who we are as people, right? These issues run really deep, and passions run deep on this, and I'm grateful for that, because I wrote this book because I am worried and have been worried about stagnation that no one is paying attention to. And I think the only way to get out of something that's stagnating is really heated and passionate debate. And so I feel grateful that people care about this enough to be talking about it. Yeah. And I just hope the dialogue continues well beyond my book. Yeah. To, how are we really going to change the things that will give boys and girls equal opportunity?
Were you surprised by it? Were you kind of expecting?
I mean, certainly surprised by kind of the volume.
Yeah.
But again, grateful.
Yeah.
Grateful. I mean, I want a national conversation, and I want the private conversations. Yeah. And I think it's still too early to see if any of this actually matters. Yeah. But I'd like to think that this will be one part of what, building on what so many people are doing. Right. To work together and try to change this.
Having 1,000 people during a holiday week, spring break and all that show up to, I think the message is being, can we have a round of applause, please?
For you guys.
Doing that, absolutely. Okay, so I want to hit on a couple of questions that were submitted from the audience, so I'm going to read this off. So Sheryl, you have mastered blending your personal interest in supporting women with your professional life very well. Was this a conscious choice that you made in shaping your career?
No, I mean, I talk about this in the book. As of 4 years ago, I never said the word woman in the workplace. Because we never say the word woman, right? I mean, as a woman, if you say that, you think the person on the other end of the table thinks you're asking for special treatment or about to sue them, right? Mm-hmm. And as a man, you certainly don't talk about gender. There's a story in my book of a man who runs a large institution. He said it's easier to talk about his sex life in public than it is to talk about gender. But no, I mean, when I first spoke out publicly on women 2.5 years ago at the TED conference, and I was going to give a talk on women, I was told it would end my career. I said, people told me once I did that, people would notice I was, get this, a woman. But I also was told that I would be typecast, because if I cared about women's issues, I couldn't possibly be a serious business executive. And I was just too worried about what I was seeing, and I spoke out anyway, and I hope I'm one of many who show that you can do both. We can be both. The world, I think for all of us, but particularly for women, the world wants you to be one thing. You can be a mother or a professional. You can be someone who cares about business or someone who cares about women's issues. We let men do a lot of things at once. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Men are allowed to be fathers and great professionals, CEOs and husbands, interested in their side passions and interested in business. And I think we have to let women do that too, and I think we can.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so a couple other from the audience here. Your thoughts on sex education, especially in early childhood? It's interesting.
So I'm not an expert on this. I did some research for the book. The differential treatment of boys and girls starts when we're babies. As parents, mothers, we overestimate our sons crawling and underestimate our daughters. Starting in kindergarten, when we send our kids to class, we call on boys more. And if boys interrupt more, they're fine. And when girls interrupt, we're told them to put their hands down and speak when spoken to. So the data on single-sex education shows that there's no benefit to boys, and there's a huge benefit to girls. That's not going to scale. And so, I think obviously each parent has to make their own choice. But I do think we would do well to change these stereotypes starting in the classroom. Yeah. So that boys and girls can coexist. Absolutely. And get treated equally.
That makes sense. So which women leader, you talk about Gloria Steinem a lot in the book, but which women leader do you look to for inspiration? You mentioned a lot of folks, but
yeah.
Who would you?
Many, I mean, and I'm not saying this just because she's local, but Melody Hobson, who I think a lot of people know. Melody said, when I first met her years and years ago, she said, I want to be unapologetically Black and unapologetically a woman. And she said, I am almost always the only African-American woman in the room. There are a couple others, but there's a handful. And she's right. And she said, but I'm not going to apologize for either. And I've watched Melody. We've served on several boards together. We've done a lot together. I've watched her unapologetically stand up for what she believes, stand up for people that she thinks are not getting treated fairly, and it has been a magnificent thing to watch and learn from. I don't know if I would have written this book had I not met Melody.
Wow, that's a credit to Melody after that. Can I one more? Okay, I'm gonna do one more here. So Lean In is not probably found in the parenting section of the bookstore, but as I started to read it and with my young children, what's my advice to my children? What can I do to make them leaders? How can I influence my children?
Yeah. So we need to recognize that we have an ambition, we have a leadership ambition gap in this country for girls. Starting in junior high, more boys than girls want to be president of their class. It goes all the way through to college, it goes into the workforce. At every level, more males than females want to lead. And when I talk about the leadership ambition gap, I want to be clear what I don't mean. It doesn't mean there aren't women who are just as ambitious as men. There are. And it doesn't mean that there aren't lots of situations where there's not one form of ambition. Everyone has to form their own way. But we have a leadership ambition gap, and I think we need to explicitly encourage our daughters to lead, and I think we need to explicitly encourage our sons to nurture. The flip side of the 14% of women in senior management roles is that of the stay-at-home parents in this country, 4% are men. And we do not make it easy for those men. We call the class mommy and me. That is not welcoming. My friends who are, stay-at-home fathers, which is a hugely important job, they get treated with suspicion on playgrounds. Forget not being welcomed. People are suspicious. We have to change that, and that starts in how we raise our children. Equal encouragement for leadership in girls and nurturing in boys.
Well, thank you, Sheryl. I think
Sheryl,
John's going to wrap it.
Thank you.
I was so inspired by your talk that I actually emailed my wife, and I just got a response, sorry, the laundry's done. So
There's always tomorrow.
yeah, there's
Don't you
always
worry,
tomorrow.
there'll be
We
more
have a lot of
laundry.
So I want to thank you for, you can see this was a tremendous success. Thank you, Kevin, and thank the mayor who had to just run out. So thank you so much. This
Thank
has
you.
been a great for the club.
Thank you.